Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. I am excited about this topic. I've had Starliner. Ooh, the button got pressed. Here we go. I've had Starliner on my list of things to talk about for quite some time. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic because this has been such a delayed mission. I don't necessarily want to talk about the mission itself. I feel like that's been covered so much just based on the number of journalist requests that I'm getting. Like this mission is being covered a lot by a lot of journalists, not just space journalists, but other journalists. And you know what? This is still a new computer and I feel like I'm fuzzy. I am so sorry. Like until I go I don't know if I'm actually fuzzy. It does this on Zoom too. So it's funny how that works. I don't know. But apologies. It's I'm still getting used to the quirks of this computer. Anyway, so there's been a lot of coverage of Starliner already. As of today, it is scheduled for Monday. Hey Ross, good to see you. As of today, it's scheduled for Monday, May 6th. And hopefully that will happen because it looks like the weather is going to be beautiful. There's been a lot of talk about what this mission means for NASA, what it means for Boeing. I want to talk about the commercial aspect of it, the non-NASA customer future that could be. Hello, ABAMD. What is Betterlige's Raw? So the chat says Betterlige's law applies. I don't know what that is. So if you could inform me what that is, I'd appreciate it. So I want to talk about a lesser known or a lesser discussed topic because it had been talked about a bunch several years ago. What Starliner might mean for the commercial sector and for commercial transportation outside of NASA. But it has really faded in the background, understandably so, because this mission, NASA, when they awarded contracts to SpaceX and to Boeing, they anticipated that SpaceX and Boeing would start launching in 2017. And then SpaceX started launching Crew Dragon with the Demo 2 mission in May of 2020. So we are several years delayed. The title, if the title of an article video is posed as a question, the answer is no. So that is better as well applies. Okay. That mostly applies. Yeah. I'd say sometimes it doesn't apply because sometimes I actually do a question mark and the answer is yes. But how did I phrase the title? I don't remember. I wrote the title. But I don't remember how I phrased it. In any case, we're going to answer this together because I don't have the answers, right? I can't peek into a crystal ball and say what the future is. I'm going to discuss the options. I'm going to discuss the competitive advantage that Boeing has, which is not much compared to alternatives. But okay, so I'm giving the history here. When NASA awarded the contracts to SpaceX and to Boeing 10 years ago, right, 2014, Boeing was the front runner. Boeing was assumed to be the one that was going to succeed and going to get started replacing shuttle missions. Shuttle retired in 2011. And it was assumed that NASA was awarding SpaceX as sort of like a secondary thing, like dissimilar redundancy is the term. You want two different capsules, two different systems operating that are operating differently. So in case one breaks down, like what happened with shuttle, there was unfortunately several incidents with shuttle that had to pause operations, including fatalities. I was there for Columbia. I was physically present for Columbia, so like that one is still heart-wrenching for me. And so if there was a problem with one of the vehicles, whether it be Crew Dragon or whether it be Starliner, you want the other vehicle operational. And that is sort of the same thought as to why we still operate with Russian Soyuz, although that's more geopolitical than it is that dissimilar redundancy, although it still applies. There's still reasons why you want that redundancy. But the geopolitics is probably the primary and the redundancy secondary in that arrangement. So the idea was that Boeing was going to win first. Like they were going to get astronauts up to space station first because they had such a long history. Boeing has decades of spaceflight history, over 100 years of aviation history. So no one back in 2014 thought that SpaceX would beat Boeing. But here we are because SpaceX started operations with NASA's crew transportation missions in 2020. And here we are with not Crew Dragon, with Starliner, which, by the way, if you've been around long enough, you know that CST 1100, whatever they were calling it something else back then, having to do with the square footage of, crew, whatever. They changed it to Starliner. I like that better. So the idea was back then, when that was announced, that not only would Starliner be operational for NASA, it would be operational for other partners, other commercial opportunities. And in fact, at that time, they were talking about not just that Soyuz and NASA crew. I'm blanking on the term. Why am I blanking on terms? Because it's Friday. I do these on Friday, but then on Friday I'm like burnt out. The crew transportation exchange, which we still do. We saw it with shuttle, where Russians would fly on shuttle, and then American astronauts would fly on Soyuz, and they continued that with Crew Dragon, and the anticipation was they continue that with Starliner. So that's written into the contract, but that's not commercial, right? However, what is written into the contract back from a decade ago was that Boeing was allowed to sell commercial flights. The idea was they were going to partner with Space Adventures. And those of you who know the history of space tourism, especially space tourism to the International Space Station, Space Adventures was the one bringing up these private astronauts, starting with Dennis Tito to the space station in 2000. He was originally going to go to Mir. That didn't work out. So then he got to be the first private astronaut to the International Space Station. Space Adventures has flown several people since then, but they stopped operating. They didn't stop operating, but they stopped partnering with Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, back 2 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine. So that's gone. I don't believe that Space Adventures ever and continues to operate with Roscosmos anymore. I don't really know what Space Adventures plans are, but that announcement that was made, in fact, it was back in, I want to make sure I say this right. Yeah, 2019. 2019, Space Adventures actually put out a whole big website promotion for Boeing Starliner, saying that here is something that's coming online summer 2019, they said, was coming online to start flying private astronauts to the space station. So you can see how there was a lot of anticipation that Boeing was just going to make this happen, right? NASA had assumed it was going to be 2017, but these things are always delayed. But it was assumed that this was going to be not only operational for NASA astronauts, but also operational for private astronauts. Not happening. But what we did see happen was an announcement with Orbital Reef. Orbital Reef is the commercial LEO destination, the commercial space station that was announced back in 2021. And so late in 2021, we saw that announcement with Blue Origin, with Sierra Space, and with Boeing. Boeing was going to be a crew transporter for Orbital Reef using Starliner. And that is actually still on their website, not on Orbital Reef's website. That's gone. But on Boeing's website, if you go to Boeing Starliner website and you look, you can see it, under destinations, it has ISS, and you can click on that, and it has Orbital Reef. And it looks like you can click on it, but you can't. They removed the link. So it makes me wonder, what did they remove? So there's no other details on there aside from the fact that under destinations, they list two, one of them ISS, the other one Orbital Reef. There has been no announcement from Orbital Reef since that 2021 announcement about Starliner being crew transportation for Orbital Reef. My guess is that Orbital Reef and everybody else is waiting to see what happens with Starliner, because around that same time, we had the problems with the first uncrewed mission, the demo mission, and then they redid the demo mission. They had a second uncrewed demo mission, and that was 2022. So I am a little surprised that Orbital Reef even announced that with Starliner back at that time, because that was right in that period where the first uncrewed mission, the demo mission, did not go well. It was so many problems with the software. It was an embarrassment. It was like, what is going on with Boeing? Like that kind of mentality. And right in that time period was when that announcement was made, which actually in retrospect surprised me, because you'd think that they'd go with an already operational vehicle. Crew Dragon was already flying astronauts for a year and a half by the time that announcement was made. But I'm not them, so I don't know what kind of partnerships, I don't know what exactly was going on behind the scenes there. What we do know is that second mission back in May of 2022, it was more successful, but we still had that 2-year gap, right? It's still been 2 years since Starliner had that second mission. And now I think everybody's just waiting for this coming mission to see what happens. This is a technology demonstration mission. It's not an operational mission. It is to demonstrate that Starliner is capable and safe for launching astronauts to the International Space Station. I actually have no doubt that it will safely do its mission, simply because NASA is on top of it. NASA is not going to allow Starliner to fly NASA astronauts without NASA being convinced that it is safe. They really have quite learned a lot of lessons from previous incidents where they've ignored things. I think they're relearning this with Orion right now. I actually contemplated adding Orion to this topic, but that's just too much information. So I think I'll talk about Orion next week, because for those of you who don't know, there was a NASA Inspector General report that just came out about Orion and Orion's engineering problems with the heat shield. Oh, it's not good. It's not good. So I think NASA, though, has learned quite a bit of history about ignoring problems and putting astronaut lives at risk. Now, astronaut lives will always be at risk. Spaceflight is not safe. It will never be safe, probably, just as cars are not safe, right? We take these risks, but we also try to mitigate against the risks. So I do believe that the mission that is coming up will be as safe as NASA and Boeing can make it, knowing that it will never be 100% safe. So it will be absolutely devastating if something happens, but I do not, just coming from a professional point of view, do not think that that is likely, that there's going to be an incident, simply because NASA really is on top of it. Like, there's been so much. That's why this has been delayed for so long, right? It's because there's so many things that need to be checked off in order for astronauts to fly on this thing. Otherwise, NASA would force Boeing to do, I don't know if they can contractually force Boeing to do another uncrewed mission, but they could probably force the issue. Now, going back to actually the uncrewed missions, right? Boeing's losing money on this. Boeing had given a fixed price contract, which is very unusual for Boeing. Boeing is not used to fixed price contracts. Boeing is used to cost plus contracts. Cost plus is when NASA continuously gives them money for all the delays and all the problems, and just keeps on throwing money at the contractor. Fixed price is what it says. There is one price, and Boeing takes that, and any other delays or problems, Boeing has to eat that cost. And so Starliner development is actually costing Boeing money. Boeing not only has to do this demo flight on May 6th, they have 6 additional contracted missions for NASA, which honestly, I'm not really sure if they're going to get to by the time ISS retires. It depends on the cadence, right? If this next mission is completely successful and they don't have any reason to delay, then hopefully they will ramp up cadence where they can do at least 1 mission a year so that they can get 6 additional missions done by the time ISS is supposed to be retired in 2030. That's the current timeline, at least. Hopefully more than 1 a year, but that's about average of what they need to get those missions done. If there are problems, then they're really going to be scrambling. But what is the capacity for Boeing to launch Starliner and do additional missions to make up the costs, right? Do they have any additional capacity to do non-NASA missions in addition to NASA's missions when they're so far behind? I don't know. My guess is no. My guess is that they're just going to be scrambling to do these NASA missions by the time that ISS is ready to be retired. But looking at an ISS future, post-ISS future, where maybe Starliner has proven itself, maybe it has 7 crewed missions under its belt, the demo plus the 6 additional, then I can definitely see it could be a provider for Orbital Reef. It could be a provider for one of the other commercial LEO destinations. It could be a free flyer. Although, going back to the idea of competitive advantage, Boeing has very little competitive advantage against SpaceX at this point with human spaceflight. 10 years ago, it did, right? 10 years ago, it was, again, the front runner. It was the one that was assumed was going to win this competition and launch astronauts first because of its long history. But now Boeing has had incident after incident on its aviation side, on its spaceflight side. It's not looking good compared to SpaceX's Falcon 9 workhorse, which is launching every few days, and all of the crewed missions that Falcon 9 and Dragon have done. Yeah, not just the NASA missions, right? Not just NASA, but also the Polaris project and Inspiration 4, and these Starship missions, which are not crewed yet, but have already been contracted. NASA already has contracted to send astronauts to the surface of the moon with Starship HLS. It just has this proven history now that it didn't have a decade ago, which makes SpaceX the obvious front runner and the obvious choice for anybody who wants to fly commercial human spaceflight. Not talking about the NASA contract that's already in existence, but any additional contracts. What we might see are non-US government entities flying on Starliner as a commercial mission to bypass the traditional method of flying astronaut partners. So traditionally, the way it's been done is that, let's say, a European government is part of ESA, the European Space Agency, which then has this grouping of ESA astronauts, and ESA astronauts are then allocated space with NASA missions as a partner, and that takes a long time. And very few ESA astronauts get a chance to fly. And then if you're a Japanese astronaut, it's a different thing, but very similar. Canadian astronaut, very similar. Korean, it's just very few of these partner astronauts get a chance to fly through the traditional method. So what we're seeing over the past couple of years is a bypassing of the traditional method, where governments are flying their own astronauts through Axiom Space in partnership with SpaceX. So we have these Axiom missions that are now not flying as many like rich individuals. They're flying, government representatives. And so we're seeing now government entities saying, why should we go through the government process that takes forever and we might not ever see one of our own fly, where we can buy a trip through Axiom Space and get on a not a Starship, Falcon 9 and Dragon. And so we might see that with Starliner simply because the demand is insanely high for this. Less than a quarter of the countries of the world have ever flown one of their own to space ever. And so you can imagine that all of the governments of the world, any one of them that have interest in space, which is not 100% of them, right? But quite a bit of them have interest in flying, and quite a bit of them have at least a little bit of money where they can put towards saying, this is going to advance our prestige, our leadership in high technology. It is going to look good against our regional neighbors. It is going to inspire the next generation. There's so many reasons why a government want to fly its own to space and put aside whatever amount of money that is to fly with a commercial provider, whether that is, Axiom Space and SpaceX, or whether that is Boeing and Starliner. And Starliner would probably contract with Vulcan, ULA's Vulcan, because Atlas V is what they're riding on Monday, but Atlas V is going to be retired. It's kind of spoken for, so Vulcan is the up and coming. Vulcan is also kind of busy. So Starliner is actually allowed, like it's designed to fly on Falcon 9 if it needed to. And that sounds crazy to think of Boeing Starliner on top of Falcon 9, but there is precedence for competitors to SpaceX flying on Falcon 9, simply because Falcon 9 is such a workhorse of the entire world right now. So that is a possibility that I see. And that is really the only possibility that I see in the near term, is governments that have the money, that have very limited access to space, having taken any means necessary to get to space. And if Starliner starts proving itself, then that becomes an option for these other governments who want to fly their own to space, whether it's to ISS or not. It could be a free flying mission. I think we're going to have a lot more interest even on the wealthy individual side post ISS. So there are 4 commercial LEO destinations that are funded by NASA. And then there's a few others that have unfunded NASA agreements. And then there's still others that are not awarded any kind of contract at NASA at all, but still pursuing their own thing. So we got Axiom Space, we got Orbital Reef, we've got Starlab. I said 4. I guess I meant 3. I'm still thinking about Northrop Grumman, but Northrop Grumman's joined Starlab. So sorry about that. There are 3 CLDs, commercial LEO destinations, that are funded by NASA, and then a few others that are not funded by NASA, but still in partnership with NASA. And if those things can start flying, if we have Axiom, or if we have Haven 1, I think is what VAST is calling theirs. If we have these things start to get up there, and there's a means to transport people, right? If there is Starliner that is operational in addition to, SpaceX Dragon, then I can see a lot more of that bottled up demand really going towards whatever means are necessary. And again, it might not be immediate. It might be 5-10 years down the line, but I think that's a possibility, because Boeing has a huge incentive to recover their costs. It has cost them money to develop this mission, this capsule for NASA's missions. It has lost them money. You can go back and see the reports, the financial reports that are filed, and how much Boeing has taken out of their profits to the point where there's a net loss. So whatever money NASA has given them, they've actually spent more money on developing Starliner. So they need to recoup that cost, right? They don't need to, but they want to. So that's where I see commercial possibility going for Starliner, is the possibility of, one, non-US governments paying for opportunity to fly to space on Starliner, and two, um, any individual, whether it's a private individual or representative of a company or representative of a country, flying on Starliner to get to a commercial LEO destination, whether that's orbital reef or not, because I don't believe that there would be any reason not to fly to Axiom or to Starlab or to any other destination that's up there, as long as Starliner has proven itself and is somewhat competitive price wise. Now that's to be seen, right? We do not know pricing wise what the difference might be between Crew Dragon and Starliner to fly to, let's just say, orbital reef. We don't have any idea what that cost would be and how that might compare. So if it is significantly higher to use Starliner compared to Crew Dragon, then what I'm saying is completely wrong. And like I said, I don't know. I can't predict the future. So it's really going to depend, again, on how things play out with the performance of Starliner, whether it can prove itself, because ULA is much more expensive than Falcon 9, but yet ULA still has a market that it can trust to pay those higher prices. So if there's a reason for Starliner to be more expensive and have others pay for that more expensive flight, then it's still competitive. We just don't know what that will look like yet. All right, so I did want to add one more thing, which is that this mission, again, is a demo mission. So even though I said that I'm completely convinced that as safe as it can be for the astronauts, it's that safe, but we still might see some things that will delay future missions. Something might go wrong. It might not be a 100% successful mission, in which case that's the worst case, not the worst case, but that's the second worst case scenario for Boeing, because that will mean a long delay again. That will mean that it could be another 2 years until we see another flight. It could be that NASA is going to require there to be another uncrewed flight before they put NASA crew back on board. So what we want to see on Monday or whenever that launches is a success of this mission according to the plan. According to the plan, every step of the way. Every step has its own milestones. And so not just safely getting astronauts to the ISS and back, but doing it on the timeline that is expected. Because if you remember back with that first mission, uncrewed mission, it was something to do with the software that messed up the timeline, and it was such a mess. And I'm sure they fixed that. But that's what we want to see. We want to make sure that everything is predictable, because what we expect to see with this mission is what we see now, that's clockwork with the Crew Dragon missions. I mean, I hardly pay attention to the timelines of Crew Dragon. Like I notice when they launch, I notice when they land, but it's just clockwork. It's just assumed it's going to work. And that's what we want to see with Boeing. We want to assume that it's going to work and not assume that it's not going to work. Because at this point, I don't know about you, but when I see Boeing in the news, I'm assuming it's a problem. Boeing has such a problem right now with its aviation side, with its space. I need Boeing's success here. I don't personally need it, but I want Boeing's success here so that we can trust that it's going to be operationally safe for not just NASA astronauts, but for the rest of the potential astronauts that it could fly in the future. Because I'm a fan of human spaceflight. I'm a fan of spaceflight in general, but I want to make sure that we have multiple avenues of getting to space. As much as I love SpaceX, and I do, I think that it's a good thing to have competition. As much as Boeing is sort of competition, again, it's the pricing and the cadence we don't know yet. But I think it's a good thing to have multiple means of getting to space. If it doesn't work, says ABAMD. If it doesn't work, what is Boeing's threshold before they pull the plug? An excellent question. There was talk about a year-ish ago amongst Boeing leadership that they could pull the plug on this. They still have to fulfill their contract to NASA. If they break their contract to NASA, how likely is it that NASA will give them an additional contract in the future? Boeing is the operator for SLS, so Boeing still has that because SLS is extremely politically popular. So I don't believe that SLS is going to be put aside at any time soon. But if there is another contract that they are bidding for and they've broken their Starliner contract to NASA, what's the likelihood that NASA is going to give them another one, right? We need 2 for competition and 2 for dissimilar redundancy, but we have competition and dissimilar redundancy. We need 3 providers. You can kind of call Soyuz a third provider for right now. And if you want to talk about U.S. providers, we've got Sierra Space and Dream Chaser, which has been over 20 years in production. So it's looking good for testing this year. I think Dream Chaser is going to make significant progress this year. It's not going to be ready to have crew on board this year, but we do have other means of transportation for crew coming on board in the future, in addition to Starship. um, Starship's a bit overkill when we're talking about transportation to commercial LEO destinations, but it's also a possibility. Dream Chaser gets a pass for not winning earlier contracts. It did win some, right? But you're right, it did not win. It did not win crew commercial crew program, and did not win cargo. Right? Actually, did win one cargo, didn't it? But it didn't win the other one. So yeah, Dream Chaser has definitely been delayed, and it did not get the money that it probably could have used along the path. But yeah, so again, I can't predict the future. I can't tell you that Dream Chaser is going to win. I can't tell you that, Starliner is going to win. I just don't know. But here are the possibilities, right? I'm laying out here what I think is the possibility. I don't think it's going to be significantly competitive against Crew Dragon, but I think there's a place for Starliner amongst the heavy demand, the high, like, really bottlenecked demand. Like if we suddenly have 10 different companies or different means of transporting crew to space stations, I think that all 10 of them are going to be filled. Like there is so much demand that I think that no one has really tapped at all, begun to tap. Because even SpaceX, I mean, they're limited, right? Dragon is smallish. Um, and so I think that once we start getting buses rather than cars going, like what shuttle was supposed to be, right? We called it space shuttle, was supposed to be a shuttle. I think once we truly get buses going, we'll see how much we can fill those buses. I think it's going to be surprising to a lot of people how many, not just again government entities, but private individuals, companies. Like there's just so much in demand right now, and the cost has dropped. Right, the cost is not what it used to be. I don't think it's going to drop significantly anytime soon, but I do think that it's dropped enough that it's really opens it up to a lot more options in terms of customers. I like to keep these under half an hour. I love the questions. So keep those questions going if you're watching live, or if you want to post in the comments if you're not watching live. So I love interacting with you all. Let me know if you want me to talk about Orion and the problems highlighted next week. I don't know if I want to dive into that or not. That is such a topic. But Orion recently did have that OIG report put out, which I actually haven't read it yet. I've only read the reports of it. So I have it as an open tab. I'm going to go ahead and read that next week. And if you want me to, I will dive into that for the topic of next Friday. Or maybe we have something else to talk about. Maybe, hopefully, we won't have anything negative to talk about Starliner next Friday. You all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in.